Within the bath. Every bath begins with a vision, where ideas and strategies define directions, from the depth of strategic thinking to ever-evolving dynamics of the world. A program broadcast in English brings insight into the journeys that shape the course of individuals, institutions, and nations. Prepared and presented by Mohra Al Zubair and audio director, Warrant Officer Ward bin Salim Al Rawahi.
Assalamu alaikum, our dear friends. Welcome back to Within the Path. Last week, we began our conversation on warfare within the broader theme of justice in Islam, focusing on how the Quran addresses fighting in times of conflict. What was clear in the verses we read is that fighting is never presented as an objective in itself. Rather, it is the last resort, permitted when oppression and injustice persist and peaceful means no longer protect people from harm. Within this framework, fighting in Islam is tied to self-defense and to the protection of justice. We also saw that before this permission was given, Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, was repeatedly guided towards patience and forbearance, towards responding peacefully. Only when oppression continued and escalated did permission for self-defense appear. But even with that permission, the Quran places clear limits on how fighting is conducted. And one of those limits is the command, "Do not transgress." The verses also make something else very clear. If the other side ceases, then the fighting must cease as well. The conflict ends there. This requires great restraint, because as human beings, we may feel the urge to continue in anger or retaliation. Yet the Quran places strict boundaries precisely because war carries immense harm, pain, and destruction, and is never the aim. But it is only a means to protect and ensure people a dignified and just life. Today, we continue this discussion. It is clear that whenever warfare is mentioned in the Quran, it is tied to purpose, and that purpose must serve justice. The Quran sets conditions and limits, and those limits remain binding. The existence of permission under certain circumstances does not become a reason to harm innocent people or those who are not engaged in fighting. And this is what the command, "Do not transgress," refers to. Fighting is directed only towards those who are actively engaged in fighting. In other words, the combatants, and not beyond them. Fighting or killing anyone who is not engaged, such as civilians, goes against this command. And in Islamic teachings, transgression also includes destroying homes and buildings without cause and causing unnecessary destruction to the environment. These very principles were adopted in Article 3 of the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, adopted by the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation in Cairo in 1990. Article 3A states, "In the event of the use of force and in case of armed conflict, it is not permissible to kill non-belligerents such as old men, women, and children. The wounded and the sick shall have the right to medical treatment, and prisoners of war shall have the right to be fed, sheltered, and clothed. It is prohibited to mutilate dead bodies. It is a duty to exchange prisoners of war and to arrange visits or reunions of the families separated by the circumstances of war." Article 3b states, it is prohibited to fell trees, to damage crops or livestock, and to destroy the enemy's civilian buildings and installations by shelling, blasting, or any other means. Now, I'd like us to turn to a verse from Surah Al-Ma'idah. قال الله تعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. O believers, stand firm for Allah and bear true testimony. Do not let the hatred of a people lead you to injustice. Be just, that is closer to taqwa. And be mindful of Allah. Surely Allah is all aware of what you do. Even when emotions are strong, justice remains the measure and is described here as closer to taqwa. The taqwa we spoke about in previous episodes, the compass that teaches a person to give, restrain anger, and pardon others, becomes especially meaningful in moments like these. This means that even in conflict, hatred cannot become the leading force. The Quran calls people back to discipline and moral clarity, reminding them that justice must remain intact even in the most difficult moments. Our dear friends, stay tuned, and we'll be back right after this break. Our dear friends, welcome back. When we connect these verses, the direction becomes clear. Permission to fight is tied to dhulm, injustice, and it applies when one is being fought against, meaning in self-defense. At the same time, firm boundaries are placed for the sake of justice and the protection of life. Without those boundaries, the intensity of war can push human beings towards anger, vengeance, and cruelty. This framework acknowledges the reality of harm, bloodshed, pain, and families torn apart by war. And it places limits precisely because of that reality. Reflecting on everything we have spoken about over these 2 episodes, I am reminded of a line we quoted in episode 23 from the reading on moral development in military leadership, where the author writes, morally ambitious officers have not only determined outcomes on the battlefield, but they have changed civilization. That line captures what the battlefield truly represents: a determining moment, a moment in which humanity is either upheld or destroyed. And this is exactly why the Quran regulates warfare the way it does. It reminds us that moments of conflict reveal some of the greatest moral tests a person or society can face. In many ways, this guidance, this call for restraint, reflects a deeper recognition of human nature. When harm is done, the instinct to retaliate can easily take over. Anger can rise quickly, and ego can push a person to respond with greater force because the other side has done so. And the Quran teaches that true strength lies in the ability to hold oneself in that moment, to remain guided by mercy, compassion, and justice. Because if that restraint is lost, conflict spreads and chaos follows. Like fire, violence can grow and consume everything around it. In moments like these, someone must remain the responsible actor, the one who keeps balance and prevents destruction from spreading further. And that requires great discipline, humility, and the ability to control one's ego. This is precisely where real strength lies, because if anger, pride, and ego are left unchecked, they can cloud judgment and lead toward destructive decisions. The Quran, therefore, continually calls us to cultivate taqwa, a state of awareness that helps control these impulses and states rather than be controlled by them. And the guidance we see here goes beyond the battlefield. It speaks to a broader responsibility placed on human beings to preserve balance, prevent chaos, and to ensure that justice remains the compass even in the most difficult moments. May we always uphold the foundations of justice, not only as a principle we speak about, but as a responsibility we carry through life. A responsibility to ourselves, our communities, our countries, and to humanity as a whole. Thank you. Until next time, this is Mohra Al Zubair from Within the Path.
Within the Path. Every path begins with a vision, where ideas and strategies define directions, from the depth of strategic thinking to ever-evolving dynamics of the world. A program broadcast in English brings insight into the journeys that shape the course of individuals, institutions, and nations. Prepared and presented by Mohra bint Zubair Al Zubair and audio director, Warrant Officer Ward bin Salim Al Rawahi.